Good morning. Welcome to Eastern Avenue Baptist Church on this, what is today? The 8th day of January, the second Sunday. Now then, since I don't really know how Brother Herb is, does anyone actually know how Brother Herb is? Okay, I heard it was his eye. I heard he wasn't feeling good. Yeah. Had a bad cough. Okay, well, we need some extra prayer for Brother Herb. Now, I'll do what, and when he told me this, I want to explain something to you men and you ladies especially. Herb texted me Friday afternoon, okay, and Herb said, "Will you be in church Sunday?" I said, "Yes, I'll be in church on Sunday school." He said, "Do you have a lesson ready?" I said, "Close, but I can be ready." He said, "It's yours, thanks." I said, "You're welcome." That was the entire conversation, okay? So I happened to be outside when this happened. I walked inside my lovely bride, and I said, "I'm going to teach Sunday." Did Herb text me? And she said, "Is he sick?" I said, "I don't know." She goes, "Is something wrong with the family?" I said, "I don't know." You know, "Well, what do you think it is?" I said, I don't know. This is what he said, which reminded me of a joke. And I looked it up, and it's a Jeff Foxworthy joke. And it relates exactly to what happened. And what it is, it says, where women have more questions than men have answers. I don't know if you've heard this before, okay? He said, a while back he got a text, and the text said, "Please pray for Tom. He's been in a bad wreck." So he went into his wife, and he said, "I just got a text. It said, 'Please pray for Tom. He's been in a bad wreck.'" And his wife asked, "Was he driving?" He says, "I don't know. I just got a text, and it said, 'Please pray for Tom. He's been in a bad wreck.'" And she said, "Was Carol and the kids in the car?" He goes, "I don't know. I just got a text, and it said, 'Please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck.'" She asked, "Were the other people hurt?" And he says, I really don't know, but I got a text that said, 'Please pray for Tom. He's been in a bad wreck.'" She said, "What hospital did they go to?" And he said, I don't know. I just got a text. It said, 'Please pray for Tom. He's been in a bad wreck.'" And she says, "You don't know anything. What do you know?" He goes, "I know you need to pray for Tom. I got a text. He's been in a bad wreck." And that's kind of how my Friday afternoon went. But I'm not one to judge. And speaking of judging, all right, if you'll turn to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7 is basically the conclusion of Christ with his Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to look actually just at two verses. And the verse I'm going to talk about is a verse everybody already knows. Chapter 7 and verse 1 says, "Judge not that ye be not judged." Judge not that ye be not judged. Now, it's amazing to find out that people who have never read the Bible will quote this verse. And it certainly seems to be the most quoted verse in the Bible. And you may have had occasion when someone may have said it to you, whether you had an opinion that something was right or something was wrong, and they brought that up to you. You yourself may have said that to someone else, okay? But the message seems to be that you shouldn't make judgments about another person. And the popular conclusion, which is this New Age religion almost in a way, is that we should let everybody do their own thing, accept the differences in their personal choices, because that's between them and God. Well, what Jesus is actually doing here, he's trying to direct us on how to conduct ourselves in reference to the faults of others. This verse is probably misquoted in that people say, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." You heard that one more than you actually heard the spoken correctly. But the normal thing is "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And I bring it up because It's not in the Bible anywhere, in any Bibles. I looked them through a series of Bibles. It's not, at least isn't in there. It seems to have come out of the 1800s, out of sermons, and it became a popular saying. Because you have to remember, in the 1800s, there weren't very many Bibles. You know, we talk about family Bibles, but family Bibles they had, that was the only Bible that they had. Okay, so certain phrases would be picked up and used, and this particular one, they used the word least. But I looked up that word least, L-E-S-T, least. And what it means is, with the intention of presenting something undesirable. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Okay? With the intention of presenting something undesirable. Or to avoid the risk of. There's another definition of lest. Okay? But risk of what? Let's look at verse 2. Verse 2 says, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. In what measure you mete, or mete, that word mete is used. So what measure ye mete, ye shall be measured against you. It shall be measured against you. So let's read them together now. Verse 1 and 2. Judge not, that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured unto you. So this isn't a suggestion. This is a stern warning. That first verse there is a stern warning. Don't meddle. Don't judge. Okay? Now, that's not that we're going to have to judge or not judge. We make judgments every day. Okay? We're getting more into what the spirit, your spirit is, vice making everyday judgment. All right. Turn to Luke 6. It's the same thing. And chapter 6 of Luke, we're still talking about Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. But it's just a different slant on how in this case, Luke looked at it. All right, verse 37. Chapter 6 and verse 37 says, judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. Judge not, condemn not, forgive. The idea here is not that one should ignore sin or refuse to discuss its consequences. It's whether one should be gracious and quick to forgive. Why we should be gracious and quick to forgive. All right, quickly go back to Romans. Romans 2. Romans 2, and we're going to look at verse 1 and 2. Romans chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest, from wherein you judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. 2. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. So, let me get a second here. So, in looking at that particular one, I want you to go back to the New Testament, the Old Testament. We're going to go to Psalms for just a second. We're going to try to link these together. Psalm 75 and verse 7. Talking about judging here. Psalms 75 and verse 7. We're there? All right. But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, dear, if you're at Psalms, let's go to Proverbs. Keep going over and go to Proverbs 21. That's the Psalms, Proverbs 21. And verse 2. 21 verse 2 says, and this is a truth we all need to just swallow down and understand. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the hearts. In other words, what he's saying here is Jesus is condemning, not making judgments, but he's condemning a judgmental, if you will, or condemning spirit. All right? Now, how many, you don't got to raise your hand, But how many drove here today and found at least one or two people who shouldn't be on the road? Okay, or maybe more, okay? And as you go by, and you make judgments, you do, I do. Sherry tries to calm me down the whole time, so there's not enough room for where I want all of them to go sometimes. And again, by the same token, what will you say? You say, well, he's going to go up here, pretty soon he's going to have a wreck. Okay, now we don't necessarily want him to have a wreck, okay? We don't, but what are we thinking, okay? We're being that judgmental person. That fool is going to cause a wreck, and it's going to cause somebody else pain that didn't do anything wrong. So we've already judged them, we've already put them in their classifications, and all they did was passes, you know? The only one I won't forgive is the guy that pulls out in front of me, makes me hit my brakes, goes one block, and makes a right-hand turn. There is no forgiveness for that. I'm sorry. There isn't. Just back up and go the other direction. All right, now I'm getting offside. But we judge in many ways. Back in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, right at the beginning, Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19, we're going to be looking at verse 15. All right, it says here, ye shall not do unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the personage of the poor or honor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Okay. If you do have to judge a person, don't pervert it in some, in an unbiased way. In other words, you're biased against one thing and another. Another example of that, back in the New Testament, James, and James is past Hebrew somewhere. Let me see. Let's find James. James 2, actually. James 2 and verse 2. Actually, James 2 and verse 2 through 4. Someone took James right out of my Bible. Mark, hang on. I know it's on the other side of it. No one's James. James 2, verses 2 through 4. All right, now then. For if, and this is, actually, if you remember this is just is kind of James talking about different people doing different things. For if there comes into your assembly a man with a gold ring in goodly apparel, and there come also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect for him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, sit thou here in a good place, and say to the poor, stand thou here, there, or sit here under my footstool. Ye are not then partial in yourselves, and are becoming judges of evil thoughts. So, first off, we can judge by basically just by favoritism. In other words, by the appearances, or favoritism to one side or another. Okay. Now, also in James, go over to chapter 4. I found that one. Over in chapter 4, and looking at verses 11 and 12. James 4, verses 11 and 12 says, speak not evil of one another. Brethren. Speak not evil of one another, brethren. That ye speaketh evil of his brother, he that speaketh evil of his brother, and judges his brother, speaketh evil of the law, and judgest the law. But if thou judge the law, thou art not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and destroy. Who art thou that judgest another? So we judge actually by speaking evil of others. That's making a judgment on someone. He did this or he did this. And I'll give you a sad example. Just the other day I was talking to my neighbors about another neighbor and their children. Okay? And I said, they really grew up horribly. And they this and that and the other. The lady that I was talking to then told me that their oldest son saved her life from drowning. So she had a certain prejudice toward liking those people. You know what I'm saying? We don't know when we wander ourselves into something where we're really going. See, I thought I was being kind of cool because I knew, and I find out, oh, really, I should have just shut up and not said a word about it. But I wandered on in and I spoke evil to someone. All right, Mark chapter 4. I can find that one. Mark chapter 4 and verse 24. Mark 4 and verse 24. And again, Jesus. And he said unto them, take heed what ye hear. With what measure ye mete, what measure you use it, it shall be measured to you. and unto you that hear shall more be given. What he's saying now, you hear something, okay, be careful how you repeat it, if you even do repeat it. And if you repeat it wrongly, or if you slander, or if you do these things, then your reward is going to be worse. Your judgment is going to be worse than your judgment on that person. Okay, so what we see, what we hear, how we speak, okay, all these things affect judgment, our own judgment, or whether we should or whether we shouldn't. So carefully consider what you hear. Now then, we have to conclude that some behavior and ideas are wrong, right? And we know that, all right? But we should not conclude that the people who did it are worthless. I was doing that when I talked about the neighbor's children. I didn't say they were worthless, but I was implying that, and they weren't, you know, and the lady was right. Whether she saved her life or not, the lady was still right. I was wrong, all right? We must make judgments, but we should draw conclusions before we have, you know, we should not draw conclusions before we have the facts. We should not judge the motives of another person. When we say things like, well, he meant to cause trouble, or he did that, he intended to hurt me or hurt that person, okay? We're making judgments on things we don't know anything about. We're just making a rash judgment, if you will. We don't know the person's mind. We don't know why they did it. We don't know any of that, but we make that judgment. So we should work hard just to be fair, okay? That's the key, all right? We should talk to people rather than talk about people. Okay, that also comes under the same thing. We should never conclude that someone is beyond hope. Look at me. Okay. Even in the worst situations, we should continue to love that person. Now here's another thing that I come across that really stood out in my lesson, is that we should not treat unbelievers like believers. In other words, don't expect a non-Christian to live like a Christian. Don't try to hold someone to God's standard if that person rejects God to begin with. This is counterproductive. So what do? It's better just to be friendly, to speak the truth in love. Okay, don't point fingers or anything else, and look forward to opportunities, and the Lord will give them to you, to introduce more ideas to them. But don't say, if someone says, well, will I go to hell? Yeah. Can't deny that. You can't change that. We don't have any choice, okay, to say that those that don't trust Jesus won't be saved, nor do we have to be happy about it. When that comes back from, well, he's going to get what he deserves. That's really none of our business. I mean, even if it's something that ends up being horrific, like a child being, or molestation or something like that, we've got to give that to God. Okay, now we understand the court system, but we personally have to give that to God, because God will make the judgment on that person. However heinous it was or anything else, God is the one who's going to make that judgment. But we must tell the truth. We're not given the option, if you will, to negotiate what God has declared as truth. Okay. We must be able to relate to people with our arms open, vice our arms closed. Back in Luke 6:37, it mentioned forgive. Forgive and ye shall be forgiven. Now that's a whole other lesson I'm not going to get into, but just a little bit. All right? The Bible teaches us that if we really understand the depth of our own sinfulness, if we truly could grasp the nature of our offense to God, if we really understood the magnitude of the gift of God's grace, okay, that has been given to us, then we will forgive others. Now, we all have a different person in here we need to forgive. Okay? Some are very hard. Some will never be forgiven. I don't know. But we all have somebody that we need to forgive. The person who is most compassionate, if you will, is the one who's the most aware of their own weaknesses. And I found that to be true. Humble people, even though you might not know anything about them, are aware, okay, of their own shortcomings. Okay, they don't flaunt them or anything else, but they're a person who will forgive another. Quickly forgive another. Stand for another when nobody else will. Like I said, in the most horrible situations, we have to trust God to be the judge, okay? And I said before there in Proverbs 21 there, every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the heart. Okay. He is the only one that can bring true justice, okay? And it's not that forgiveness means we're letting it go. See, some people take that attitude. Well, if I forgive him, it's the same thing as just ignoring it. It's not. When you do some of that, when you let that go, again, you're entrusting that to God, or you should be, entrusting that to God to take care of. Our willingness to forgive another person is a sign that we understand what it means to be forgiven. So now these verses I've gone over are challenging because it's easy to say but hard to do. Very easy to say, but very, very, very hard to do. In a world of rash judgment, Jesus calls us to be compassionate. In a world that justifies wrongdoing, Jesus tells us to hold on to the truth. In a world that loves stories that involve revenge or people getting what they deserve, Jesus tells us to forgive. And in a world that hoards everything they can hoard to themselves, Jesus tells us to be generous. Now, this Matthew verses 1 and 2 is really, I found, summed up in 1 Corinthians 11:31. You don't need to go there, but 1 Corinthians 11:31 says, "For if we judge ourselves, we should not be judged." If we judge ourselves, we should not be judged. Meaning, we judge our sins. Meaning that we judge our shortcomings. If you're excuseful, if your behavior is hiding behind saying, judge not lest ye be judged, understand that sin is sin. And even if we make it socially acceptable, sin is still sin. And I want to say this. Whose sin is smaller? I want you to think about this. I want you to think of neighbor. Who do you want to pick some? Whose sin is smaller? Because there are no small sins before God. No small sins. Every sin against God is a big sin. God doesn't judge the sins. He judges the heart of the man. All right. So the challenge here from Jesus, if you will, is not to ignore wrong behavior, but is to adopt a more compassionate attitude. Before we criticize someone, we need to ask, is this going to be helpful? Is it necessary? Is it loving? If we stop and ask these three questions, we'll be much less critical and a much more enjoyable person to be around. Thank you. You up there? You can cut that off right now. Any questions?
Thank you for joining us for our service today. We are so glad you did. As the Word of God was presented, you may have heard something that sparked an interest in your mind. If this is the case, we would love to talk with you further. You can call our church office at 407-892-4644 or leave us a message on our church webpage, www.eab.church. From Pastor Callan and the family at Eastern Avenue Baptist Church, may God richly bless you today and always.